Entire societies have vanished from human memory as if they never existed. This video uncovers the forgotten cataclysms responsible for these profound disappearances. You will learn the hidden patterns that link our modern world to these ancient collapses. We will explore how a single volcanic eruption can silence a vibrant culture and why a thriving metropolis might suddenly be abandoned by all its people. This journey reveals the fragile line between enduring legacy and becoming a mere whisper in time. What part of our own world might one day be just a forgotten story? A cataclysm is far more than a simple disaster. It is a violent, large-scale upheaval that fundamentally rewrites the world. Think of a disaster as a single, tragic chapter in a book, while a cataclysm is the event that closes the book entirely and begins a new one on scorched pages. These are the forces that do not just damage civilizations but can reset them entirely, erasing complex societies and plunging regions into dark ages. We are talking about events of almost unimaginable power, from volcanic super-eruptions that blot out the sun for years to mega-tsunamis that scour coastlines clean and rapid climate shifts that turn fertile breadbaskets into barren deserts overnight. Even impacts from asteroids or comets have left their brutal marks on our planet's story. To understand these events, we must look beyond a simple chain of cause and effect. The true picture is a complex web where geology, climate, and human society collide. A volcano does not just bury a city in ash, it triggers a volcanic winter that collapses agriculture, which leads to famine, which sparks social unrest and war until the entire structure of a culture unravels. So how do we even begin to understand events so vast and so ancient? Experts piece together the clues from the faintest of traces. Geologists drill deep into ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica, extracting long cores that hold, like dusty library shelves, thin layers of volcanic ash from eruptions that occurred thousands of years ago. Archaeologists map the foundations of cities now submerged beneath the sea, their stones silent witnesses to a coastline that vanished in a single, terrible day. By defining these cataclysms, we begin to see the sheer scale of the forces required to not just destroy a city, but to erase its very memory from history. This sets the stage for our next, even more haunting question. How does a vibrant, complex civilization with all its people, stories, and knowledge simply fade from human awareness? The very mechanisms that erase a civilization are often terrifyingly simple in their brutality. A society forgets its own past not in a single moment, but through a slow, grinding process we call cultural amnesia. This is the final stage of a cataclysm, the point where not only the people are gone, but their memory begins to fade from the world. It starts with a catastrophic population collapse. When 90% of a people perish, the living libraries of their culture perish with them. The elders who held the epic poems, the artisans who knew the secret of their crafts, the farmers who understood the unique rhythms of their land, all are silenced. Their knowledge, passed down through generations, vanishes in a single season of famine or plague. Then comes the physical destruction of knowledge. Great libraries, whether made of clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, or codices, are incredibly fragile things. They can be consumed by fire, dissolved by floodwaters, or simply crumble into dust over centuries, their stories lost to the slow, patient hunger of time. Even the most resilient form of memory, the oral tradition, is not immune. Stories told around campfires can be warped over generations, their meanings shifting as they pass from one traumatized survivor to the next. More powerfully, these stories can be actively suppressed when the scattered survivors are absorbed into new, rising cultures. A conquered people might be forbidden from speaking their own language or practicing their rituals. To survive, they must adopt the customs and gods of their new masters, and over a few generations, the old ways become a faint, half-remembered dream, then nothing at all. This process is not merely about forgetting historical facts or dates. It is the loss of a collective soul, the extinction of unique ways of seeing the world, the stories that made a people who they were, and the wisdom they held about how to live within their environment. So we must ask, what fragile parts of our own global culture, reliant on digital clouds and fragile power grids, could be just one catastrophe away from vanishing forever? This haunting question finds its first and perhaps greatest answer in a civilization that mastered urban living and then vanished so completely that we do not even know what they called themselves, the people of the Indus Valley. Deep within the arid landscapes of modern Pakistan and northwest India lie the silent ruins of a society that rivaled ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. The Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan culture, was a marvel of the Bronze Age. From around 2600 BCE, its great cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, thrived. They built the world's first known urban sanitation systems, with sophisticated plumbing and drains running through their homes. Their construction followed a standardized system, using uniform, kiln-fired bricks across a vast area, a sign of incredible central organization. They developed a unique written script, a language that covered their seals and pottery, a code that remains unbroken to this day, keeping their stories and their names for themselves a permanent secret. This was a society of immense planning and apparent peace, with little evidence of the palaces, grand tombs, or massive weapons so common in other early kingdoms. Yet by 1900 BCE, this magnificent civilization had crumbled. The great cities were slowly, systematically abandoned. The intricate trade networks stretching to distant lands fell silent. Their script was no longer carved, and the knowledge of its meaning died with the last generation who knew it. The cultural memory of this advanced people faded so completely that it left no trace in the later histories of the Indian subcontinent. It was simply forgotten, waiting for archaeologists to rediscover it millennia later. The question of what happened has no simple answer. There are no layers of ash from a sudden invasion, no mass graves suggesting a violent end. Instead, the evidence points to a slow, grinding collapse. One leading theory suggests a profound climate shift. The lifeblood of this civilization was a mighty river system, the Ganga, which many believe was once a mighty sister to the Indus. Scientific studies of ancient sediments and cave formations indicate that the monsoon patterns that fed these rivers began to weaken. The land, once a fertile breadbasket, may have slowly dried out. Years turned into decades of unreliable rains, leading to crop failures, food shortages, and a gradual migration away from the great urban centers. People did not vanish in a day. They likely dispersed into smaller, simpler villages, their complex urban identity dissolving over generations. The very sophistication that made them great may have contributed to their fragility. A society reliant on intensive agriculture and complex trade is exquisitely vulnerable to a changing climate. When the environment they had mastered began to shift, their entire way of life became unsustainable. The silent ruins of the Indus Valley tell a sobering tale. They show us that a civilization does not need to be smashed by an asteroid or buried in lava to be erased. It can be unraveled thread by thread until the grand tapestry of its culture is lost to the wind. This raises a chilling possibility. If a slow shift in weather patterns could erase one of the most advanced societies of its time, what power might a rapid global climate shift hold over our own world? This leads us to look at another forgotten cataclysm, one where the climate itself turned violently against humanity. While the Indus faded over centuries, other empires were shattered in a geological instant by a force they could not see or fight, the climate itself. Abrupt climate shifts have acted as silent assassins throughout history, striking at the very foundations of civilization, which are always food and water. One of the most dramatic examples is a period known as the 4.2 kiloyear event. Around 2200 BCE, the planet was gripped by a wave of severe aridification, a deep, prolonged drought that stretched across continents. In Mesopotamia, the mighty Akkadian Empire, which had unified a vast region under the legendary Sargon of Akkad, suddenly disintegrated. Archaeological evidence shows that their northern agricultural heartland was abandoned, with ancient dust storms literally burying settlements under layers of wind-blown silt. At the same time, far to the west, the Old Kingdom of Egypt, the age of the pyramid builders, collapsed into chaos. The Nile's annual flood, the predictable lifeblood of the kingdom, failed for decades. The result was famine, followed by social unrest and the fragmentation of central power, a period Egyptians themselves later called the First Intermediate Period, a dark age of strife. What makes these events so terrifying is their speed. We are not talking about a slow, creeping change over millennia. These climatic shifts could unfold over mere decades, perhaps just a few generations. That is far too quickly for complex, rigid societies to adapt. A farmer might plant the same crops his family had for 500 years, only to watch them wither year after year as the rains never come. The centralized grain stores of an empire would be emptied, the authority of its godlike rulers would be questioned, and the social contract that held everything together would simply dissolve into a desperate struggle for survival. How do we know this with such certainty today? Paleoclimatologists, the detectives of ancient weather, have learned to read the environment's own archives. They drill deep into ice caps, extracting cores that preserve tiny bubbles of the ancient atmosphere, revealing past temperatures and greenhouse gas levels. They analyze layers of sediment at the bottom of lakes, where the types of pollen and dust tell a story of wet years and dry. They study the rings of ancient trees, where each narrow ring signifies a year of hardship and thirst. This data paints an undeniable picture. Our climate is not a stable, passive stage upon which human history plays out. It is a dynamic, powerful character in the story, one that can erase entire cultures when it turns against them. This reveals a profound vulnerability in even the most powerful empires, a lesson that finds a stunning echo in the fate of a brilliant and vibrant civilization that thrived on an island in the Mediterranean, the Minoans of Crete. The vibrant world of the Minoans was shattered by a geological cataclysm that echoed across the Mediterranean. On the island of Thera, a volcano exploded with a force that defies comprehension, a blast estimated to be many times more powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa. The event ejected cubic miles of rock and ash into the atmosphere, creating a colossal caldera where a mountain once stood. The initial devastation was immediate and horrific. Tsunamis, waves towering over 100 feet high, radiated outwards, slamming into the northern coast of Crete just 70 miles away. The Minoans were a seafaring people, their wealth and power built upon their navy and coastal trading centers. In a single day, those ports and fleet were utterly annihilated, smashed by walls of water that scoured the shoreline clean. Inland, the destruction continued as a thick blanket of volcanic ash fell from the sky, smothering farmland and poisoning the soil. This was not a single disaster but a cascade of failures. A society cannot thrive when its ships are splinters, its ports are rubble, and its fields will not grow food. The Minoan civilization, renowned for its beautiful frescoes, intricate palaces like Knossos, and a culture that seemingly celebrated peace and nature, was brought to its knees. They did not disappear overnight, but the eruption broke their economic backbone and shattered their confidence. In this weakened state, they became vulnerable. Within a few generations, the Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland moved in, absorbing the remnants of Minoan culture and imposing their own. The unique Minoan identity, their art, their architecture, and their undeciphered linear script faded into obscurity, becoming little more than a half-remembered legend. Some scholars wonder if the ghost of this magnificent, drowned culture echoes in Plato's later story of Atlantis, a sophisticated island kingdom that sank beneath the sea in a single day and night. The Minoans stand as a stark testament to a civilization struck down not by a slow decay, but by the raw, unthinking power of the planet itself. This pattern of geological fury erasing entire cultures was not unique to the Old World. Across the Atlantic, in the Americas, the Earth also spoke with a destructive voice, burying cities and memories under layers of volcanic stone. Across the Atlantic, another great city rose from the fertile soil, a metropolis that would have stunned any European traveler of its time. In the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi River near modern-day St. Louis, the city of Cahokia thrived for centuries. At its peak around 1050 CE, it was a bustling hub of perhaps 20,000 people, a population that rivaled London in the same era. Its skyline was not defined by stone cathedrals, but by something equally impressive, over 120 massive earthen mounds. The largest of these, known today as Monk's Mound, is a colossal structure covering 14 acres and rising 100 feet into the air, the largest pre-Columbian earthwork in all the Americas. This was the center of a vast trading network and a sophisticated society with complex social hierarchies, celestial observatories, and a culture that shaped the very landscape. Yet, by the time European explorers finally pushed into the American heartland, they found only silent, grass-covered mounds. The city was utterly abandoned, its people dispersed, its very name lost. The later indigenous tribes of the region, like the Osage and the Quapaw, had only fragmentary and vague traditions about a mysterious race of mound builders who had vanished long ago. What could cause such a powerful and populous city to simply empty out? The collapse was not the result of a single invasion or a sudden plague. Instead, it appears to have been a slow unraveling driven by the city's own success. Cahokia's growth put immense pressure on its environment. Vast tracts of forest were cleared for building and firewood, leading to erosion and the loss of game. The very soil that had been so fertile may have become depleted from intensive farming. This environmental strain was likely compounded by social strife, as a ruling class struggled to maintain control over a population facing scarcity. Then nature delivered a final blow. A period of global cooling known as the Little Ice Age began to set in around the 14th century. For a society dependent on maize agriculture, even a slight drop in average temperatures and a shortening of the growing season could have been catastrophic, leading to repeated crop failures and famine. The people did not vanish. They likely made a rational choice, dispersing into smaller, more sustainable communities across the region, leaving their great capital to the elements. The silent mounds of Cahokia stand as a powerful monument to a forgotten American civilization, a stark reminder that complex societies rose and fell in the Americas for millennia, completely independent of the Old World. Their stories were not written on papyrus or clay, but held in the fragile vault of human memory. This raises a profound question. When a civilization vanishes, what happens to its story? How are the memories of such a cataclysm preserved? And perhaps more importantly, how are they distorted as they are passed down through generations by word of mouth alone? The silent mounds of Cahokia remind us that a civilization's story is not always carved in stone. Sometimes it is held only in the fragile vault of human memory, passed from one generation to the next through the spoken word. Oral traditions are the living libraries of non-literate societies, immense repositories of history, law, and cultural identity. For thousands of years before the invention of writing, this was the only way a people could remember who they were. These stories, songs, and rituals are not mere entertainment. They are the encoded survival guides and historical records of a culture, and remarkably, they can preserve the memory of earth-shattering events for astonishing lengths of time. Aboriginal Australian stories, passed down for over 7,000 years, describe coastlines that vanished as the sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. Similarly, Native American oral histories from the Pacific Northwest contain vivid accounts of volcanic eruptions that match the geological timeline of Mount Mazama's collapse, which formed Crater Lake. These are not just myths, they are the long echoes of real cataclysms, preserved in the collective memory of the people who witnessed them. Yet this system of memory is heartbreakingly fragile. An oral tradition is a chain that must be continuously maintained. It requires elders to teach and the young to listen and memorize. If that chain is broken for even a single generation by a devastating pandemic, forced cultural assimilation, or the violent disruption of conquest, the knowledge is gone forever. The living library burns down and there is no backup copy. The very process of oral transmission also ensures that these stories are not static history books. They evolve, with each telling across centuries. The literal truth of an event can become intertwined with spiritual meaning, moral lessons, and powerful symbolism. A story about a great flood might be both a memory of a real tsunami and a metaphor for spiritual cleansing. This presents a profound challenge for modern researchers. How do we sift through these ancient narratives to find the kernel of historical truth? How much of our understanding of forgotten cataclysms relies on correctly interpreting these ancient echoes, where geology and myth are fused together? This challenge finds its ultimate test in one of the world's most widespread and enduring stories, the search for a real-world inspiration behind the myth of the Great Flood. This global chorus of flood stories points to something deeper than mere coincidence. From the ancient Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical account of Noah, from Hindu Puranas to indigenous Australian Dreamtime narratives, cultures separated by vast oceans all tell a strikingly similar tale. A great deluge is sent by the gods, a chosen few are warned to build a boat, and the waters rise to wipe the world clean. How could such a specific narrative emerge independently across the globe? Many researchers believe these stories are the long, echoing memories of real and terrifying events witnessed by our early ancestors. The most likely culprit is the great melt at the end of the last ice age. For thousands of years, much of the world's water was locked in massive ice sheets. Then, as the climate warmed, the seas began to rise, not slowly and steadily, but in dramatic pulses. Vast coastal plains that were home to human settlements for millennia were swallowed by the advancing ocean. A perfect example is Doggerland, a fertile landmass that once connected Great Britain to mainland Europe. This entire country, with its hills, rivers, and presumably its people, now lies beneath the North Sea. Imagine the trauma for a Stone Age community watching the shoreline they knew, the land where they hunted and gathered, relentlessly retreat year after year until their entire world vanished beneath the waves. These were not just high tides, these were permanent, landscape-altering drownings. Geologists have identified other potential sources for these cataclysmic flood memories. In North America, a colossal glacial lake known as Agassiz, holding more fresh water than all the world's lakes combined today, suddenly breached its ice dam. The resulting outburst would have been a cataclysm of biblical proportions, a torrent of water rushing into the oceans that could have raised global sea levels by inches in a matter of weeks. For any coastal society living at that time, it would have seemed as if the very gods were unleashing the seas upon them. The key to understanding the flood myth phenomenon is to see it not as a single global event, but as a universal human experience of local catastrophes. Different communities in different parts of the world faced their own drowning events, and each encoded that shared trauma into their foundational stories. This process transformed a geological event into a moral and spiritual lesson, a story about divine punishment and the chance for renewal. It makes you wonder, if flooding left such a profound scar on our collective memory, what other ancient stories might be rooted in real cataclysms? Could the universal fear of the sky falling, found in so many cultures, be a distant echo of something that once did fall from the heavens? But could a single day from the heavens truly erase millennia of human progress? The idea of a civilization reset by a cosmic impact feels like the plot of a science fiction film, yet a growing body of evidence points to a terrifying possibility. Around 12,800 years ago, as the last ice age was receding and humans were spreading across the globe, something catastrophic happened. A leading hypothesis suggests a comet or asteroid exploded in the atmosphere high above North America, a phenomenon known as an airburst. The energy released would have been staggering, equivalent to thousands of nuclear bombs detonating at once. The immediate effects are almost too horrifying to contemplate. Vast swaths of the continent would have been instantly set ablaze by the thermal shockwave, creating a continent-wide firestorm. The blast itself would have leveled forests and triggered tsunamis along coastlines, but the true civilization-ending damage came from the aftermath. The immense amounts of soot and dust thrown into the atmosphere would have blocked out the sun, plunging the planet into a volcanic winter that lasted for generations. This period, known as the Younger Dryas, was a sudden and violent return to Ice Age conditions right in the middle of a global warming trend. For the nascent human cultures and the magnificent megafauna like mammoths and saber-toothed cats that shared the continent, it was a death sentence. The climate shift was too rapid, too severe for them to adapt. Societies that were just beginning to develop more complex structures would have been fragmented, their populations scattered and reduced to a desperate struggle for survival. The developmental clock for entire regions may have been reset back to zero. While this theory remains a subject of intense scientific debate, it forces us to confront a humbling truth. Our entire history, all our art and technology and culture, exists on a planet moving through a cosmic shooting gallery. A single, random impact from space could, in one fiery moment, render it all into a forgotten chapter. This cosmic perspective makes the fate of other lost civilizations feel even more poignant, like that of a sophisticated society that mastered the most unforgiving of environments, only to be reclaimed by the sand, the Garamantes of the Sahara. The Garamantes did not just survive in the Sahara, they mastered it. In the blistering heart of the Libyan desert, a place we now consider one of the most hostile on the planet, they built a sophisticated civilization that flourished for over 1,000 years. From around 500 BCE, their kingdom was a nexus of power and innovation. They constructed imposing mud brick cities that rose from the sands, complete with defensive walls and cemeteries that held the remains of a complex, socially stratified society. They possessed their own written language, and they achieved their greatest feat of engineering deep beneath the surface. The Garamantes engineered a vast, underground web of tunnels known as fagaras. These were not simple wells, but carefully sloped shafts that tapped into ancient fossil water reserves, trapped deep in the aquifer from a time when the Sahara was green. This hydraulic network, stretching for hundreds of miles, brought life-giving water to the surface, allowing them to cultivate fields of wheat, barley, and dates in the midst of a desert. Their cities became bustling oases, central hubs in a trans-Saharan trade network that moved gold, ivory, and slaves from sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean world. They were, for centuries, the indispensable middlemen of the desert. Yet by 700 CE, their great cities stood silent, abandoned to the encroaching dunes. The Garamantes had not been conquered by a foreign army. They were defeated by the very resource that had given them life, water. Their incredible success contained the seeds of their own collapse. The fossil water they tapped was not a renewable resource. It was a geological bank account with no deposits, only withdrawals. For generations, they drew this ancient water down, and as the climate gradually became even more arid, the pressure on their aquifers intensified. The maintenance of the Fagaras became a desperate, losing battle against collapsing tunnels and falling water tables. Their agricultural base, the very foundation of their urban society, crumbled. The people likely dispersed, their political unity shattered, their written language forgotten, their very name fading into obscurity until modern archaeologists, using aerial photography to spot the faint traces of their settlements, brought them back into the light. The story of the Garamantes is a haunting lesson in sustainability. It demonstrates with brutal clarity that a civilization's greatest strength can become its ultimate vulnerability when it relies on a finite resource. Their fate forces us to look at our own world, at the vast agricultural regions that depend on depleting aquifers, and ask a sobering question. Are we, in our own way, mining the water for our future? This reliance on a single, fragile system is a theme that echoes through the collapse of civilizations, and it becomes even more devastating when that system is not just water, but the intricate web of global trade that connects us all. The grand palaces and citadels of the late Bronze Age did not fall one by one, but seemed to crumble in a terrifying, synchronized collapse. Around 1200 BCE, a domino effect of disaster swept across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. The mighty Hittite Empire in Anatolia vanished from history. The fortress cities of the Mycenaean Greeks in Greece were burned and abandoned. Even the powerful new kingdom of Egypt, though it survived, was left battered and impoverished, its authority broken. This was not the work of a single invader or a lone volcano. It was a systemic failure, a perfect storm where multiple weaknesses converged. At the heart of this fragility was a groundbreaking achievement, the world's first truly globalized economy. These empires were bound together by a complex web of maritime trade, exchanging luxury goods, but also the absolute necessities of power. Copper from Cyprus and tin from as far away as Afghanistan were shipped across the seas to be alloyed into bronze, the metal that made the weapons of armies and the tools of artisans. This international system brought immense wealth and stability, but it also created a profound vulnerability. When one part of the chain snapped, the entire network shuddered. And snap it did. Paleoclimate data from the region tells a story of prolonged, severe drought. Years of failed harvests led to famine, and famine sparked desperation. This desperation manifested as mass migrations of uprooted peoples, groups the Egyptian records grimly labeled the Sea Peoples. These were not a unified army, but a chaotic wave of refugees and warriors, displaced from their own homelands likely by the same climate crisis, now swarming the coastlines in search of new lands. They attacked ports, disrupted the vital sea lanes, and sacked cities. With trade routes severed, the flow of tin, that crucial ingredient for bronze, was cut off. Imagine an entire economic and military system, from chariot fittings to swords, suddenly unable to repair or replace its most essential material. Kings could no longer equip their armies. artisans found their workshops idle, and the very symbol of elite power became scarce. The collapse cascaded from economics into social order. Facing internal revolt and external threat, centralized governments lost their legitimacy and collapsed. The Dark Age that followed was profound. The intricate knowledge of writing, administration, and international diplomacy was lost in many regions for centuries. The vibrant, interconnected world of the Late Bronze Age was erased, its memory surviving only in fragments and legends. This ancient catastrophe holds up a stark mirror to our own globalized world. We too rely on intricate, just-in-time supply chains for everything from computer chips to medical supplies. The collapse of the Bronze Age asks us a pressing question. In our interconnected system, are we building a resilient web or a fragile house of cards that one shock could bring down? This question of resilience echoes in the fate of another civilization that mastered its environment, only to be consumed by it, the Maya of Central America. The silent stones of Tikal and Palenque tell a story of a civilization that reached breathtaking intellectual heights, only to fall into a profound silence. Between the 8th and 9th centuries, the heartbeat of the classic Maya world began to falter. In a stunningly short period, the great city-states of Central America were systematically abandoned. The grand plazas where crowds once gathered fell quiet. The skilled astronomers who tracked the cycles of Venus with uncanny accuracy no longer carved their predictions into stone monuments. The last dated stela, a stone pillar recording their history, was erected in the year 909. After that, the written record of their classic era simply stops. This was not the extinction of the Maya people, who have endured with remarkable resilience to this day. It was the catastrophic collapse of their complex political and urban system, a societal collapse so severe it plunged their world into a dark age. The intricate knowledge held by their priestly class, their advanced calendrical systems, and the historical narratives of their royal dynasties were largely lost, waiting centuries to be painstakingly decoded by modern archaeologists. So what could cause such a brilliant and established civilization to unravel? The answer lies not in a single villain, but in a perfect storm of interconnected crises. Paleoclimatologists studying sediment cores from nearby lakes have found chilling evidence. The region was struck by a series of extreme, multi-decade droughts, some of the most severe in thousands of years. These were not merely dry spells, they were catastrophic failures of the rain cycle that sustained Maya agriculture and filled the vital reservoirs of their cities. This environmental stress exposed and amplified every other weakness. Centuries of urban expansion had led to widespread deforestation, as trees were cleared for building and to make plaster for their towering temples. The loss of tree cover likely reduced local rainfall even further, creating a vicious feedback loop. Their population had grown to the very limits of what their agricultural system, dependent on seasonal rains, could reliably support. When the droughts hit, the result was inevitable famine. This scarcity bred conflict. The once competitive but ritualized warfare between city-states appears to have escalated into desperate, existential struggles for control of dwindling resources and remaining fertile land. The social contract between the ruling elite, who claimed a direct connection to the gods, and the common people shattered when those gods seemingly withheld the rain. The pyramids and palaces, symbols of royal power, became monuments to a broken promise. People did not vanish, they simply voted with their feet, dispersing from the great centers back to smaller, more sustainable villages. The political and cultural superstructure that defined the classic Maya era could not survive this decentralization. Their story is a powerful lesson in systemic risk. It shows how environmental pressure, when combined with social rigidity and resource depletion, can create a cascade of failure that no amount of astronomical knowledge can stop. They understood their cosmos with sublime precision, yet they could not prevent the collapse of the world they had built beneath it. This raises a haunting parallel for our own time. How much of our advanced technology would remain meaningful if the fundamental systems of food, water, and social order began to fray? The Maya collapse forces us to confront the terrifying concept of a dark age, not as a historical label, but as a lived reality where complex knowledge is simply forgotten and the light of a civilization winks out. A dark age is not an empty space in history, but a shadowed one. It describes a period where the lamp of written history flickers and grows dim, leaving vast stretches of time and human experience shrouded in silence. The classic example is the European Dark Ages that followed the collapse of the Roman Empire. As the legions withdrew and the great roads fell into disrepair, the intricate systems they supported crumbled. Long-distance trade withered, cities contracted, and the hard-won knowledge of the classical world, from advanced engineering to literary works, was largely forgotten across Western Europe. Literacy, once a mark of administration, became a rare skill, preserved almost exclusively within the walls of remote monasteries. Yet to call this time a blank slate is a profound misrepresentation. Life, culture, and history continued, but they were no longer being written down on parchment or carved in stone for a centralized state. The scale of record-keeping shifted dramatically from imperial chronicles to local memories, from written law to oral tradition. This is the true nature of a dark age, a transition from a society that documents its own story for a wide audience to one where that story becomes fragmented, localized, and held in the fragile vault of human memory. The very term Dark Age reveals more about the societies that coined it than the period itself, reflecting the bias of later, literate cultures looking back and seeing only an abyss where their own detailed records should be. This forces us to ask a pivotal question. If our understanding of a mere few centuries in Europe is so fragmented, how many other dark ages lie buried in the deeper past, completely obscuring the rise and fall of entire civilizations from our view? One such story begins with a people who mastered the greatest wilderness on Earth, the vast Pacific Ocean, and whose legacy was almost completely erased by time, the Lapita. Their story begins not on a continent, but in the rhythm of the waves. The Lapita people, setting out from the islands of near Oceania around 1500 BCE, embarked on the most audacious migration in human history. With little more than the stars overhead and their profound understanding of wind and current, they sailed into the emptiness of the open Pacific. Their vessels were not simple rafts, but sophisticated double-hulled canoes capable of carrying entire families, their plants, and their animals across thousands of kilometers of trackless ocean. Their survival depended on this technology, but their identity was stamped onto the pottery they carried with them, intricately decorated with geometric patterns pressed into the clay before firing. These shattered potsherds, found on beaches from New Guinea to Samoa, are the trail of breadcrumbs they left across a third of the world's surface. For 1,000 years, they discovered and settled hundreds of remote islands, a feat of navigation and courage that has never been surpassed. Then, around 500 BCE, the distinct Lapita style vanishes from the archaeological record. The pottery becomes simpler, then stops altogether. This was not a collapse but a transformation. The Lapita did not die out. They succeeded so spectacularly that they evolved. On the far-flung islands they had settled, separated by vast expanses of sea, their culture began to diverge. Their single ancestral language branched into the hundreds of tongues that would become Polynesian, Micronesian, and Melanesian. Their shared beliefs and traditions were adapted to the unique challenges and environments of their new homes, from the atolls of Micronesia to the high islands of Hawaii and New Zealand. The original Lapita identity, the name they called themselves and the specific stories they told, was slowly absorbed into the cultures of their descendants. They became the forgotten grandparents of the Pacific, their foundational role erased by the very success of their children. This reveals a profound truth about cultural memory. Migration is not just a journey across space, it is a journey through time. With each new landfall, a society must adapt to survive, and in that adaptation, something of the old world is inevitably left behind. The ancestor is lost in the air not through catastrophe, but through the slow, creative process of becoming something new. This gentle form of forgetting stands in stark contrast to the next force we must confront, one that acts with brutal, indiscriminate speed, the invisible cataclysm of disease. A microscopic organism carried on the breath or the bite of a flea can unravel an empire with terrifying speed. The Plague of Justinian, which swept across the Byzantine world beginning in 541, was not a slow environmental shift or a single geological blow. It was a biological cataclysm, a silent assassin that traveled the bustling trade routes connecting the known world. The bacterium Yersinia pestis, the very same behind the later Black Death, found its way from rodent populations in Central Asia onto grain ships in the Egyptian port of Pelusium. From there, it exploded. Contemporaries described a fever so sudden people could be healthy at noon and dead by evening. Swollen, blackened lymph nodes called buboes appeared in the groin and armpits. The death toll was staggering, with estimates suggesting 25 million lives lost, perhaps half of Europe's population at the time. But a pandemic's true cataclysmic power lies not just in the body count, but in the societal systems it shreds. Farmers died in their fields, leaving crops to rot. Soldiers perished in their barracks, leaving frontiers undefended. The intricate tax collection and administration of the Emperor Justinian, who had dreamed of restoring the Roman Empire to its former glory, collapsed into chaos. The economy shattered, and the once mighty Eastern Roman Empire was left permanently weakened, its power and influence irrevocably broken. In an age without germ theory, how could such horror be understood? The only framework available was a spiritual one. Chronicles from the time speak of omens in the sky and interpret the plague as divine wrath for human sin. This theological interpretation, while providing some comfort, fundamentally distorted the memory of the event, burying its biological reality under layers of moral lesson. The true cause, the complex interplay of trade, ecology, and disease, was forgotten for centuries. This forces a stark comparison with our own globalized world. Our international travel networks are infinitely faster and more extensive than the Silk Roads of the 6th century. A novel pathogen could circumnavigate the globe in days, not years. It makes you wonder if our advanced medicine and technology would be enough to hold the complex fabric of our civilization together against a shock of similar magnitude. This invisible biological threat presents one face of a cataclysm, but our planet also holds the power for eruptions of almost mythological violence. The fiery power that shattered Minoan civilization pales in comparison to the true giants slumbering beneath the Earth's crust. The Toba super eruption in Indonesia, roughly 74,000 years ago, stands as a terrifying benchmark. That single event is thought to have ejected so much ash and sulfur into the stratosphere that it triggered a volcanic winter lasting years, possibly even decades. Global temperatures plummeted, plant life withered, and food chains collapsed. Some geneticists believe the human population was reduced to just a few thousand breeding pairs, a genetic bottleneck that nearly erased our entire species. This was a cataclysm on a planetary scale, a brush with extinction that occurred deep in our prehistoric past, yet the mechanism remains a clear and present danger. Even far smaller eruptions have demonstrated this destructive potential. In 1815, the Tambora volcano in Indonesia blew its top. The following year, 1816, became known as the year without a summer across Europe and North America. Snow fell in June, crops failed from New England to Ireland, and famine-induced riots erupted in cities. This was not from a supervolcano, but from a single, powerful eruption disrupting climate across an entire hemisphere. Now consider a future where a supervolcano like Yellowstone awakens. The result would not be a single bad year, but a prolonged global winter. Agriculture would become impossible, global supply chains would shatter, and the intricate systems supporting billions of people would collapse within a single growing season. Our technological advancement offers no shield against a global ash cloud that could linger for a decade. The geological record is unequivocal. The planet's internal furnace has the power to end epochs of life. How do we reconcile our complex digital world with this primordial, indifferent force? This same planet holds another immense power, one that has quietly swallowed entire cities beneath the waves. The ocean floor holds the ghostly outlines of cities that once thrived on dry land. These are not the stuff of legend, but real, tangible ruins preserved in the silent, cold deep. Off the coast of Greece, the ancient city of Pavloptri lies submerged, its street plans and building foundations still visible on the seabed, a 5,000-year-old community claimed by the sea. In India, legends speak of the magnificent city of Dwarka, and marine archaeologists have indeed found structures and artifacts off the coast that lend credence to tales of a great kingdom swallowed by the waves. The forces that send a city to the bottom are varied and terrifying. Some, like the slow, inexorable rise in sea levels since the last ice age, give generations time to retreat, abandoning their homes to the encroaching tide. Others are brutally swift. The Greek city of Helike, a powerful member of the Achaean League, was utterly destroyed in a single night in the year 373 BCE. Historical accounts describe how a massive earthquake struck, causing the land to liquefy and sink. The city and every soul in it were dragged beneath the waves, vanishing so completely that its location became a mystery for centuries. These underwater sites are unparalleled time capsules, while land-based ruins are weathered, looted, and rebuilt over centuries. A city preserved beneath the sea is often frozen at its moment of catastrophe. Archaeologists diving on these sites find pottery still arranged on shelves, walls standing as they did, and the everyday debris of life suddenly interrupted. They offer a heartbreakingly intimate glimpse into the past, a snapshot of a normal day that became the community's last. For the survivors of such a cataclysm, the trauma was profound. The loss of a coastal city meant more than just the destruction of buildings. It meant the shattering of a cultural hub. The survivors, scattered inland, would have carried their stories with them, but the central place that gave those stories meaning was gone. The temple where they worshipped, the marketplace where they traded, the harbor that connected them to the wider world, all were erased from the map. Their collective memory became fragmented, their identity diluted as they merged with other populations, the specifics of their former lives slowly fading into a general folk memory of a great flood. These sunken worlds force us to ask a difficult question about our own adaptability. With a significant portion of humanity today living in vulnerable coastal areas, what would we salvage and what would we be forced to leave behind if the seas rose not over millennia but over a few short generations? The quest to answer these questions is being revolutionized by new technologies that are finally allowing us to read these lost chapters of our own story. These silent ruins are finally beginning to speak, their whispers amplified by a new generation of technological ears. Tools like LIDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, are performing a kind of digital archaeology, peeling back layers of jungle and time with invisible lasers. A plane or drone flies over a dense forest, firing millions of laser pulses toward the ground. By measuring the time it takes for each pulse to bounce back, it creates an exquisitely detailed three-dimensional map of the terrain, effectively removing the vegetation in the digital model. When this was deployed over the jungles of Guatemala, the results were staggering. The landscape, once thought to be dotted with isolated Maya city-states, was revealed to be a vast, interconnected urban sprawl. The LIDAR maps showed raised highways connecting cities, complex irrigation canals, terraced farms on every available slope, and thousands of previously unknown houses. In an instant, our estimate of the Maya population skyrocketed, forcing a complete rethink of their agricultural capabilities and the sheer scale of their societal collapse. This was not a civilization fading at the edges, but a densely populated network that failed at its core. Meanwhile, in the dark depths of the Black Sea, another technology is illuminating a different kind of loss. Sonar mapping has charted ancient river valleys and lake shores now lying hundreds of feet below the surface, a preserved landscape from a time when this was dry, fertile land. These sunken plains likely hold the settlements of the people who lived there before the Mediterranean broke through the Bosporus, flooding the basin in a cataclysmic event. Underwater robots, or ROVs, now hover over these sites, their lights piercing the anoxic, preserved waters to scan for the outlines of structures and the scatter of artifacts. These tools are more than just fancy gadgets. They are a direct counter to the cultural amnesia that has plagued our past. They give a voice to the silent and the submerged, allowing us to piece together the puzzles of how these societies lived and ultimately how they met their end. With every pass of a LIDAR scanner or every dive of a robotic probe, we recover a fragment of a story we thought was lost forever. It is a race against time, not just to find these places, but to truly understand what we are looking at. A single layer of ash in an archaeological dig is a riddle waiting to be solved. This burnt stratum could tell a story of a volcano's fury, of a city put to the torch by invaders, or of a sacred offering consumed by ritual fire. A mass grave uncovered nearby presents another puzzle, its silent bones holding the secret of a devastating plague, a generations-long famine, or the brutal aftermath of a single, decisive battle. Uncovering the remains of a lost civilization is only the beginning. The true challenge lies in the interpretation. To read these ancient clues correctly, researchers must become masters of multiple disciplines. They use carbon dating to anchor events in time, analyzing the radioactive decay in a piece of charcoal or bone to determine its age. They turn to palynology, the study of ancient pollen, to understand what plants were growing in the region, revealing shifts from fertile farmland to dry scrubland. Osteologists, specialists in human skeletons, can detect signs of malnutrition in the thinning of bone, or identify the specific marks left by weapons on a rib cage. The style of pottery and tools found at a site offers another clue, showing cultural connections or sudden, disruptive changes. All of these threads must be woven together to build a narrative that is not just compelling, but plausible. Yet this process is never perfectly objective. Our own modern worldviews and unconscious biases can subtly color our interpretations. For decades, the sudden abandonment of a city might have been automatically attributed to invasion, reflecting a 20th century preoccupation with war while environmental causes were overlooked. Today, in an age concerned with climate change, we might be too quick to see every collapse as an ecological disaster. Even the very language we use is up for debate. The word collapse implies a total and catastrophic failure, a definitive end. But many scholars now argue for the term transformation, suggesting that what looks like a disappearance from our distant viewpoint might actually have been a painful but creative reorganization. A vast urban center might dissolve, but its people could have dispersed into smaller, more resilient communities, carrying forward elements of their culture in new ways. This interpretive complexity is a powerful reminder that history is not a simple collection of facts waiting to be found. It is a story, a constantly evolving narrative we construct from the fragments that time has left us. How can we ensure that the stories we tell are as faithful as possible to the lived experiences of the people who are now only whispers in the soil? This fundamental question finds a perfect test case in the enigmatic story of one of the America's very first civilizations, the Norte Chico of Peru. High in the arid river valleys of coastal Peru, a society built its legacy not on art or war, but on monumental geometry. The Norte Chico civilization, also known as Carol Soup, represents a profound mystery. It is the oldest known civilization in all the Americas, thriving for nearly 2,000 years, a period so vast it dwarfs the entire timeline of the Roman Empire. Its people constructed impressive pyramidal mounds, some standing over 6 stories tall, and designed complex urban centers with sunken circular plazas and sophisticated residential areas. Yet, for all its architectural genius, this culture presents a series of puzzling absences. Archaeologists have found no evidence of defensive walls, no grand storehouses for weapons, and remarkably, no pottery to speak of. The vibrant art and intricate ceramics that define other ancient cultures are conspicuously missing here. It appears to have been a society that channeled its collective energy into construction and community, rather than conflict or material wealth. Its decline is as quiet as its existence. There are no layers of ash, no mass graves, no signs of a violent end. Instead, the great plazas and mounds were slowly, ceremoniously abandoned, filled with offerings, and then left to the wind. The civilization likely did not die, but rather transformed, its people and traditions gradually blending into the tapestry of later Andean cultures like the Chavin. But without a deciphered written language, their voice is lost to us. We see the stage they built, but we can only guess at the plays they performed upon it. What does this tell us? The Norte Chico case forces us to question our very definition of a civilization. We often equate cultural sophistication with complex art, military power, or written records. Yet here was a society that achieved remarkable feats of engineering and social organization without any of those hallmarks. It suggests that the core of a civilization might be something more fundamental, the simple, powerful ability to coordinate human effort toward a common, grand vision. Their silent, enduring monuments ask us what truly remains when everything else, even the memory of a name, has turned to dust. This stark simplicity stands in sharp contrast to the intricate, interconnected systems that both empower and endanger our modern world, raising a critical question about the nature of resilience itself. The true test of a civilization is not its grandeur, but its ability to bend without breaking. Societal resilience, that mysterious quality that allows some cultures to weather a cataclysm while others are erased, often comes down to a few critical factors. The first is diversity, a society that relies on a single crop for food, a single trade route for wealth, or a single, rigid hierarchy for governance is a society standing on a very narrow ledge. When a crisis hits, it has no other options, no alternative paths to survival. Diversity acts as a safety net, spreading risk across a wider web. The second factor is flexibility. A culture that can adapt its social rules, its economic practices, and even its core beliefs in the face of new, terrifying realities has a fighting chance. It can decentralize power, shift to new food sources, or migrate to new lands without its entire identity shattering. The final ingredient is the nature of its knowledge. A society that encodes its survival wisdom in rituals, stories, and practical skills that can be passed down and adapted is far more resilient than one that locks its most vital information away in a central archive that can be burned or flooded. We can see this stark contrast in two ancient worlds. Ancient Egypt, for all its iconic stability, faced repeated collapses, most notably at the end of the Old Kingdom. Yet the civilization as a whole endured for millennia. Its resilience was rooted in the predictable, life-giving rhythm of the Nile's annual flood, which provided a constant, renewable foundation for agriculture. More importantly, Egyptian culture and bureaucracy possessed a deep, ingrained continuity. The idea of a unified kingdom ruled by a pharaoh was so powerful that even after periods of fragmentation, the central state could reform, drawing on a shared cultural template. They were diverse enough in their administrative approaches and flexible enough in their theology to absorb shocks and rebuild. Now compare this to the classic Maya. Their civilization was a masterpiece of specialization, exquisitely tuned to a specific environment. Their magnificent water management systems, their intensive agriculture supporting vast populations, these were their greatest achievements and their ultimate vulnerabilities. When the climate shifted and the rains failed for generations, their specialized systems became obsolete. Their social structure, centered on powerful divine kings, could not adapt to the crisis. The contract between the ruler and the ruled broke when the gods, as represented by the king, failed to deliver rain. The result was not an adaptation, but a disintegration. This historical lens forces a difficult question about our own time. Modern global society possesses technological powers that would seem like magic to the ancients. Yet, are we truly more resilient? Our just-in-time supply chains are miracles of efficiency, but they are also incredibly fragile, a house of cards vulnerable to a single disruption. Our food systems are often dependent on vast monocultures and depleting aquifers. Our digital knowledge, for all its volume, is stored on media that could become unreadable in a generation without power and specific hardware. True resilience, it seems, is not built on complexity alone, but on a foundation of social cohesion, redundant systems, and the collective will to act for the common good when disaster strikes. This analysis of vulnerability finds a perfect and chilling example in one of history's first great empires, which may have been brought down by a force it could not fight, a change in the sky itself. The Akkadian Empire, the world's first empire, was brought down not by an army but by the sky. The Akkadian Empire, forged by Sargon of Akkad, unified the fractious city-states of Mesopotamia into a colossus stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. This was an unprecedented achievement, a centralized state ruling over diverse peoples with a common language and administration. Its power seemed unshakable, a permanent new chapter in human history. Yet within just 180 years, this mighty empire shattered, and its northern heartland was so utterly abandoned that it would remain empty for 3 centuries. The silence that followed was profound. For a long time, the cause was a mystery, until science began to read the story written in stone. Deep within caves in Oman and Iran, speleothems, the mineral deposits that form stalagmites and stalactites, hold a precise record of ancient rainfall. Their layers tell a clear and terrifying story. Right at the time of the Akkadian collapse, the region was gripped by a severe, multi-century megadrought, an event so significant climatologists call it the 4.2 kiloyear event. This was not a few bad harvests, this was a fundamental, long-term shift in the climate. The empire's northern provinces relied on rain-fed agriculture, and when the rains failed for generation after generation, the fields simply turned to dust. The result was a catastrophic domino effect. Famine drove desperate, starving people from the countryside into the cities, overwhelming the centralized grain stores and administrative systems. Social order disintegrated into unrest and rebellion. The authority of the king, who was seen as an intermediary to the gods, crumbled when it became clear he could not command the heavens to bring rain. The empire, for all its military and bureaucratic power, had no defense against a changing sky. The Akkadian collapse is one of the clearest examples we have of a sophisticated society broken by climate change. It forces us to see the people of the past not as abstract figures, but as climate refugees facing the same desperate choices and tragic displacements we see in headlines today. Their story did not simply vanish, however. The trauma of this collapse was so deep it likely etched itself into the region's foundational myths, perhaps even echoing in the later Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, with its themes of a search for immortality in a world of impermanence and loss. The terrifying events that shattered civilizations did not simply vanish from memory, they were transformed. Our ancestors, lacking the science to explain a volcanic winter or a sudden flood, turned these cataclysms into the foundational stories of their cultures. The raw, geological terror of a super-eruption could become the Zoroastrian struggle between the forces of light and a destructive spirit, a cosmic battle reflecting the very real darkness that fell from the sky and the biting cold that followed. Similarly, the prolonged climate deterioration that chilled the Nordic Bronze Age, bringing years of famine and hardship, may have found its echo in the myth of Ragnarök. This epic tale of a great winter swallowing the world, a final battle among the gods, and the eventual rebirth of the earth from the sea, is not just a story, it is a cultural memory encoded in allegory. These myths served a profound psychological purpose. They took incomprehensible, random suffering and gave it a narrative, a reason, a place within a cosmic order. They transformed a meaningless disaster into a test of faith or a necessary cleansing, offering a framework for understanding the world and, crucially, a sliver of hope for renewal after the darkness. By carefully placing these ancient stories alongside the geological and climatic records, we can sometimes catch a glimpse of the real events that traumatized our ancestors, seeing how a generation's collective trauma was woven into the very fabric of their identity and passed down as sacred truth. This process makes you wonder what events from our own time, our own planetary crises and global upheavals, will be mythologized by the generations that come after us. This symbolic transformation of disaster into doctrine leads us to consider a different kind of erasure, one not wrought by nature, but by the deliberate hand of cultural conquest. Yet the most intimate form of cataclysm is the one delivered not by nature, but by human hands. A cultural conquest systematically dismantles a civilization, targeting its memory, its identity, and its very soul. This is an active, deliberate erasure, a forced forgetting imposed by a conquering power. The Spanish arrival in the Americas serves as a stark and tragic case study. It was not merely a military defeat for the great indigenous empires, it was a comprehensive assault on their knowledge. Franciscan friars, viewing native texts as works of the devil, gathered the beautiful bark paper books of the Maya, their codices filled with astronomical observations, historical records, and spiritual wisdom, and burned them in great public pyres. Only a handful of these precious documents survived the flames. At the same time, the invaders methodically suppressed native religions, tearing down temples and outlawing rituals while forcing conversion to a new god. This spiritual conquest was compounded by a biological one, as old-world diseases swept through populations with no immunity, decimating communities and severing the living chain of oral tradition that held the culture together. When the elders who remembered the old stories perished in plagues, and the books that held their science were turned to ash, an entire way of understanding the world was fractured, its continuity broken. The loss was not just of historical facts, but of entire worldviews, medicinal knowledge, and literary traditions that had evolved over millennia. This human-made cataclysm raises a profound ethical question for our present. How do we work to recover and honor these suppressed histories, to piece together fragments from the fire? This difficult task finds a haunting symbol in one of the world's great undeciphered puzzles, the Rongorongo script of Easter Island. The silent Moai of Easter Island guard a secret even deeper than their own stone faces. Scattered across the few surviving wooden tablets on the island are intricate carved glyphs of birdmen, plants, and geometric forms, a script known as Rongorongo. This is not mere decoration, it is a full written language, the only one known to have been invented independently in the entire Pacific. If we could read it, these tablets would speak to us. They might tell us the true story of the island's epic settlement, the spiritual beliefs that drove the creation of the great statues, and the internal perspective on the ecological and social collapse that followed. They could be the history book of the Rapa Nui people, written in their own hand, but that voice has been silenced. The cataclysm that struck Easter Island was not a volcano or an earthquake, but a human one. In the 19th century, Peruvian slave raiders carried off nearly half the population, including, in all likelihood, the last of the learned elders, the teachers and scribes who held the key to the script. Those who were not taken often fell to introduce diseases. Within a single generation, the living chain of knowledge was broken. The Rongorongo tablets became beautiful, meaningless artifacts, a library where we can see every shelf and every book but cannot read a single word. This is perhaps the most intimate form of loss, the destruction of meaning itself. The script is a stark symbol of how a cataclysm can erase not just a people, but their inner world, their thoughts, and their unique way of seeing existence. Its undeciphered lines haunt us with a simple question: how many other lost languages hold the final answers to history's greatest puzzles, their secrets locked away forever? Cracking such codes requires more than a single brilliant linguist. It demands the combined power of many fields, from computer science to cultural anthropology, a collaboration that is now our best hope for recovering these lost voices. A single layer of volcanic ash in an archaeological dig tells 3 different stories to 3 different scientists. To the geologist, its chemical fingerprint reveals which volcano erupted and when. To the climatologist, that same layer, found in an ice core from Greenland, marks a year of global cooling and failed harvests. To the archaeologist, the ash that entombs a city's buildings reveals how people lived in their final moments and the choices they made when the sky turned black. These separate threads of evidence are weak on their own, but when braided together, they form a rope strong enough to pull a lost civilization back from the abyss of myth. This is the power of the interdisciplinary approach, where geology, archaeology, and climatology converge to solve history's coldest cases. Geologists act as the timeline keepers, reading the planetary diary written in rock and sediment. They can identify the microscopic shards of volcanic glass from an eruption that occurred thousands of miles away, precisely dating the moment a civilization was smothered. They map the telltale signs of mega-tsunamis, finding deposits of ocean sand and deep sea shells far inland, evidence of a wave that scoured a coastline clean. Meanwhile, high in the mountains, climatologists are drilling into ancient glaciers, extracting ice cores that hold tiny bubbles of the Earth's ancient atmosphere. The thickness of each annual layer tells them if it was a fat, prosperous year or a thin, desperate one. The chemical composition of the ice reveals global temperatures, while the acidity of a specific layer can point directly to a volcanic event on the other side of the world. On the ground, archaeologists provide the human context. They excavate the storage pits that were emptied of grain and never refilled. They study the skeletons for signs of malnutrition and the fortifications for evidence of a society turning in on itself under pressure. A sudden change in pottery styles might indicate an influx of refugees, while the abandonment of a sacred temple speaks to a profound loss of faith. The true breakthrough happens when these datasets are overlaid. A climate model showing a century-long drought is no longer an abstract graph. It becomes the reason why the grain pits were empty. A volcanic ash layer dated to a specific year is no longer just a geological event. It becomes the trigger for the famine, the migration, and the social unrest documented in the archaeological record. This collaborative spirit transforms a collection of clues into a compelling, evidence-based narrative. It forces us to abandon simple, single-cause explanations and embrace the messy, interconnected reality of collapse. How can we foster more of this collaborative spirit? It requires breaking down the walls between academic silos and building shared languages, a process that is as much about human curiosity as it is about scientific rigor. This holistic view of catastrophe, one that weaves together earth, sky, and human hand, finally allows us to ask the most intimate question of all. What was it like for the survivors, the ones who lived through the end of their world? And how did that unimaginable trauma shape the memory of everything that came after? The survivors of these great collapses carried a weight far heavier than the few possessions they could salvage. Their world, with all its certainties and social structures, had literally crumbled around them. The psychological trauma of such an event would have been imprinted on the very soul of their culture, shaping the stories they told and the way they viewed the universe. A deep-seated cultural pessimism could take root, a sense that no matter how grand a society becomes, it is always vulnerable to being swept away by forces beyond its control. You can hear this echo in myths across the globe, tales of angry gods wiping the slate clean with floods or fire, a narrative born from the lived experience of watching everything you know vanish. This trauma could also foster a profound, fearful reverence for nature, seeing the climate, the earth, and the seas not as passive resources to be managed, but as living, capricious deities whose favor must be constantly earned. Yet within this trauma also lies the seed of incredible resilience. The survivors had no choice but to adapt. They had to innovate to find new food sources, develop new social compacts, and learn to live in a world that was fundamentally broken. Their endurance is a quiet testament to the human spirit's stubborn refusal to be extinguished. It forces us to see our ancestors not as dusty figures in a textbook, but as people who faced the unimaginable and found a way, however difficult, to take a next step. Their story asks us a pressing question: what lessons in resilience can we learn from them as we face our own planetary scale challenges? This profound connection to a deep, almost forgotten past leads our curiosity to one of history's most tantalizing speculations. Could there be civilizations so old, so completely erased by time and ice, that we have not yet found even a single stone? Our planet's own rising waters may have erased the most profound chapters of our story. The continental shelves, those vast, gently sloping plains now submerged along our coastlines, were once dry and fertile land, teeming with life and potentially with people. During the last ice age, so much water was locked in glaciers that sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, exposing millions of square miles of habitable territory. These now drowned landscapes were the real estate of our Ice Age ancestors. It is not a fringe fantasy to suggest that some of these coastal societies could have developed a level of complexity we have not yet imagined. The true challenge is not the idea itself, but the sheer impossibility of finding proof. Imagine a city built on those ancient shores. When the glaciers melted and the seas crept back in, that city would not have been buried under a neat layer of volcanic ash, preserving it like Pompeii. Instead, it would have been slowly dismantled by millennia of pounding waves and shifting currents. Its stones would have been scattered, its artifacts buried under hundreds of feet of marine sediment, and any organic remains like wood or textiles would have long since dissolved in the saltwater. The evidence, if it exists at all, is not waiting for us in a single dramatic ruin, but is pulverized and spread across the ocean floor like a billion-piece puzzle. This is why mainstream archaeology remains skeptical, not out of closed-mindedness, but because the signal would be so faint, so physically inaccessible, it might be indistinguishable from the geological noise. Yet the persistence of the idea, from Plato's Atlantis to modern speculation, serves a vital purpose. It forces us to confront the vast gaps in our knowledge and the sobering reality of our planet's dynamic nature. We have mapped the surface of Mars in greater detail than our own ocean floors. We simply do not know what lies beneath the sediments of the Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia or the Bering Land Bridge, pathways that once connected continents. The possibility of a pre-glacial civilization is less a specific historical claim and more a powerful metaphor for the limits of our understanding. It reminds us that the absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence, and that the most significant loss in human history may not be a single library burning, but an entire continent silently slipping beneath the waves, taking countless untold stories with it. Human history is written not only in the monuments we build, but in the profound silence that follows their abandonment. Our journey through these forgotten cataclysms reveals a humbling truth that every human achievement, no matter how grand, is balanced on a knife's edge. We are perpetually vulnerable to the immense, indifferent forces of our planet and to the hidden fragilities woven into our own societies. The drowned cities and the deserts that swallowed proud kingdoms are more than just historical curiosities. They are urgent, echoing lessons. They teach us about the absolute necessity of resilience, the critical importance of living in balance with our environment, and the fragile nature of the knowledge we often take for granted. Our own civilization, with all its dazzling technology and global networks, is not immune to these ancient patterns. The same pressures that unraveled the Maya or collapsed the Bronze Age world still exist today, often in new and more complex forms. Let the whispers of these lost worlds inspire us to build a future that is more adaptable, more deeply mindful of our planetary home, and more dedicated to the vital task of safeguarding our collective memory against the erosions of time and catastrophe. The greatest tribute we can possibly offer to those who were forgotten is to finally learn from their silence. Thank you for exploring these profound mysteries with me. I would be curious to know which of these forgotten cataclysms resonates most deeply with you, so please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below.